Hello. Wow, okay. I had more coffee than I thought here. Welcome, everybody, to today's public information session with the school board to look at some items for our upcoming vote. My name is Chuck Worcester. I'm your school district moderator. Today's meeting is a public information session, so we aren't voting on anything today. We won't be following Robert's rules, so no need to worry about any of that. Those of you who've been following along know that at town meeting, we voted a school ballot that had 2 elections for school directors, and both of those candidates won and are now on the board. And so we're not reviewing that vote today. That happened at town meeting and that is completed. So what we're to do today is to look at 3 different questions that we will be voting on a week from Monday, which I believe is the 15th, if the date serves. Okay, so a week from Monday is when we'll be voting on these 3 questions. The agenda, you can see most of it is up on the screen there. So we're going to look at 3 things. The first is going to be a revised budget proposal for the school district. The second will be a proposed bond issue for the school district. And then the third will be voting on proposed changes to the town charter. The charter changes were on the town ballot on town meeting, so we've already voted on them once. But we need to vote on the charter changes both as a town and as a school district in order for the changes to go into effect. At town meeting in March, the town did approve one of the changes to the charter and not the second one. Nevertheless, we will be voting on both of them again on Tuesday. The sales tax will not go into effect because the town did not vote in favor of it. Nevertheless, it will be on this ballot, and people, of course, are free to vote on it as they would like, which could inform future discussion of that issue. So, but in any event, our goal here today is an information session to look at these 3 questions. We'll hear some presentations. We'll have time for question and answer, and we'll see what unfolds. So we're going to start off with a presentation on the proposed budget for the school district for the coming year. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Merrill of the school board.
Do we need to do a call to order since we are technically a quorum of the board?
Sure, that's a great point. Yeah, why don't, Coach, could you call your board to order just for formality's sake?
I'd like to call the Hartford School Board Budget Discussion and Public Information Hearing to order Saturday, April 6th, 2024.
Okay, great.
Aye. Aye. Opposed? So moved. You have the floor.
So we can do this without destroying it. All right. Okay. We are lucky to have such a prominent gentleman to lead the town meeting, but it does mean that everybody has to adjust the microphone afterwards, or at least us shorter types do. So I'd like to thank everybody who's shown up for this, quite frankly, oddball of a meeting. This is the first time that we've ever done this in my memory, and according to the Valley News, I'm officially a long-standing member of the school board. They said so at some point, not necessarily in a complimentary way. But before I get into the presentation, I thought I would sort of walk through the situation as to why we're here and explain a little tiny bit about how the budget works, just to give people enough background to sort of understand the context of my remarks. So first of all, actually, my memory is not good enough to do the numbers from recall. The overall budget that we're talking about this year is just slightly over $51 million. Of that $51 million, slightly over $39 million is actually supported by the taxpayers through the property taxes. The rest of it is either things like the Hartford Area Career and Technical Center, which is supported by fees of all the students who attend, the Wilder School programs that are the same, paid for by the sending schools, or they're paid for out of various federal grants and things like that. So we have about 39,200,000, give or take, that we're voting on in this budget. So that's sort of the numbers that are at stake. The reason we're meeting here on a Saturday after you've already voted and having to re-vote again is to simplify it down to the ultimate level, because the state changed the law. The law that raises taxes for schools is entirely a state thing. It's not a local thing. It feels like you're voting on your local tax, but what you're actually voting is your contribution to a state tax. Because all of the money that we raise through our property taxes goes to the state of Vermont. They put it in a big pool, divvy it up to the various school districts, and send it back to us. And the formula by which it's determined what our share of the total need of the state is driven in part by how much our budget is, or actually much more accurately, by how much we're spending per student, and a lot of other factors which I'll brush on because they're important, but get to those in a moment. But the most important thing to understand was the previous previous budget and proposal to the town was based on the fact that the state had passed a law that said for this year through 2029, if we kept the per pupil increase in spending below 10%, they would keep the tax rate increase below 5%. So when we developed our budget originally, we kept the per pupil spending increase below at 8% basically, so it was well below the 10% level, because we wanted to make sure that there would be no accusations that we were sometime trying to game the system, that we had somehow claimed things that were questionable and so forth. So we deliberately kept our budget at 8%, even though under that law we could have gone as high as 10%, which was all good and well, except for when the state started looking at some of the budgets that were coming in from around the rest of the state, and they started arriving at Montpelier. I think I'm probably accurate in describing the reaction as panic, because it was going to cost the state something on the order of $154 or so million to be able to keep the promise they had made about what the increase in the tax rate would be. And they quickly realized that they didn't have anything near that kind of money. So they put into effect a new law, which instead of capping our tax increase, gave us some credits to help pay it down a bit. And by a bit, I do mean a bit. And no longer being subject to a 5% cap, we went and did the numbers on what our tax rate would actually then be, and it was basically a 40% tax increase. So remember, we've got an 8% spending increase per pupils, resulting in a 40% tax increase on the property tax. That wasn't tenable. So because the state knew when they changed the rules, they were going to make things difficult for school districts. In their vast kindness, they gave us a chance to do, well, you can change your budget so it doesn't hurt so bad. And so we proceeded to change our budget so it wouldn't hurt so bad. We had to choose a number to try to target for what our budget would be. And we had heard from the tax department and also various statements through the governor's office that the average increase in budgets, not in taxes, but in budgets, in the state of Vermont for this year was going to be somewhere around 18.5%. So we said, okay, we'll use that. We're going to be cutting our budget to have a tax increase that is no more than 18%. Now, those were budget increases as opposed to tax increase, but we had to come up with a number somewhere, and we were trying to be fair to the citizens and to the students in the district. And we did that. And so that's sort of how we got here. So if you'll go to this next slide, please, Tom. So let's rip the Band-Aid off first. The tax rate under our budget is going to be $212.70 per $100,000 of property value. This is, again, an 18.5% increase in the tax rate, not the budget, but the tax rate, over last year. For the non-residential rate, it comes out at $2,183.70. This is for the people who have second homes and things like that. And for the income sensitivity folks, which is a significant portion of our taxpayers, if your mileage will vary depending on what your income is, your property, and so forth. But for example, a tax rate, $50,000 adjusted income, the tax is going to be $1,360 per $100,000 of property tax. Those are our big numbers. Go to the next. So this is some sample tax rates. If you had 150,000, 250,000, 350,000, et cetera, in property value, that shows what your property tax is and how much it increased over last year's rates. And additionally, we did the same thing, assuming $50,000 of income for your property taxes at 150,000, 200,000, and so forth. So starting at about $2,040 at 150,000 and so forth. So that's available there in that slide. Next slide, please. So the median general fund increase for Vermont budgets was about 12%. Our actual increase is 8%. So we have an 8% increase in the budget, not per pupil, which is the more important number, but just per the total budget, which resulted in an 18.5% tax increase. And our per pupil spending, which is the most important number for us, actually went down about 1/3%. So not quite flat, down a little bit, but next slide, please. This isn't quite in the order I was thinking, but anyway, so how we're going to spend the $39,000, about a quarter goes to running the overall district, the superintendent's office, all of the expenses that are common to all of the schools and everything else. About a quarter goes to the high school, and then about 10, 11, 12%, as you can see, or 1/8 of the budget goes to the differing middle school and the elementary schools. So that's how we break up our $39 million plus budget. Next slide. Okay. This is the cuts by program that we had to do to make that budget. So the high school is down about 557,000. We cut 89,000 out of the athletics program and so forth. And you can see what the person, and the number there, I'm right, Tom, that's the number of positions cut? I didn't, okay. So we're losing 5 positions from the high school and 5 positions from the middle school and 1.7 from the White River School and 5.5 from Dothan Brook, 4.5 from Ottaquechee, and 4.1 from, I'm blanking, the district, okay. Sorry, I'm tired. So the budget that we're presenting is one that comes at a significant cost to the functioning of the district. As we discussed, these are the different positions that are going away. You can cut through those slides fairly quickly. Keep on going. And these are the non-salary cuts associated with those. Not surprisingly, most of the cuts were to the salaries because most of our expense is salaries. About 70% of the school budget actually pays for people, not things, not paper, not desktop computers, not anything, it's people. So, well, why are we in the position of having cuts per pupil spending and much increased tax rates? Well, part of it is there's been a significant period of inflation, which we are no more immune to as a school district than you are as an individual. We, like you, have to pay more for food when we provide food to the cafeteria. We have to pay more for heating. We have to pay more when we bring in experts to fix things. We're all subject to that. So we've had a lot of costs built in over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. And it's not just the US thing. This is for the Northeast region. You see basically the same graph. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but what's really happening isn't that. This is a very, very, very high level of presentation of how the tax rate is determined. So if you follow the flow chart, you say that we develop the budget, you guys approve the budget, though this is a little bit out of order. Budget data is submitted to the AOE. They divide our spending by the weighted pupil. So just to explain, we get slightly more than 1 credit for high school students, I believe. We got about 1/4 credit for kindergartners. It depends on how hard they think it is, how much resources we have to give to the different classes of students. Some classes of students are significantly above 1. If you have a student who is from a low income and has, say, English as a second language, or has learning disabilities, the numbers go up. So there's a weighted value, and they get a per pupil weighted value, and they just develop our cost per pupil. It's why the weighted value never quite matches the number of individuals we have showing up for classes. We usually actually have a lot more students than we do have a weighted value because the kindergartners and the first graders don't count as much as a full person, at least in the eyes of the AOE. So they take the expenditure per pupil, They divide it by how much money they think they can raise by taxes. They determine our tax rate, and then the last step is they take that derived tax rate and they divide that by the common level of appraisal. The common level of appraisal is the ratio between the value of the grand list as determined by the last assessment that was done of the town's property and the estimated actual value. And the two can clearly get out of sync. If we are in the situation as we actually are, where we haven't done a tax assessment for a number of years and prices have been rising as they have, the grand list value is going to be less than the actual value of the property. And the state understandably wants to make sure that they're getting money based on the value of the property, not based on the grand list, because they want to get as much money as they can, but more importantly, they're really trying very, very hard to be fair to make sure that towns that have recently assessed and towns that haven't recently assessed are taxed it the same way. So there's this whole process of deriving the common level of appraisal, and this year, among all of the factors that drive the tax rate up and other factors that drive it down, the CLA is the big monster that's driving everything this time. If you can go to the next slide, please, Tom. Oh. Okay. So this is a very quick summary, sort of. Total education spending is not the determinant of tax rates. Only the amount spent per pupil is. So we've done our job to try to keep taxes down. Spending per pupil actually went down. Not by much, but it actually went down this year. Next slide, please. Remember the last step I talked about. This is what's driving it, because that tax rate that's derived through the whole process then gets to take the CLA into account. And they divide the tax rate that they've determined through that process by the common level of appraisal to determine what tax rate we'll use when we're actually taxing the citizens of this town. So next slide, please. So a couple sort of general rules about how the process works. So if you have more students, and actually we do, that lowers the tax rate. If you have fewer students, that raises the tax rate. Remember, they're taking total spending in the district and dividing it by the number of students so that you can understand that. Let's go to the yield. Yield is the number that they get from a $1 tax on property. So if you have, just say, $1 per 100,000, and the property values in the state are at $100,000, they'll raise a penny. They'll raise $1. If they have 200,000, then that $1 tax rate will raise $2, and so forth. So it's dependent on how good the yield is, how much they think for that $1 tax rate they'll raise. So an increase in the yield reduces lower tax rate, because if they can raise a whole lot of money by a $1 tax rate, they don't need to go to a $2 tax rate to raise the same amount of money, and vice versa. Common level of appraisal. An increase in the common level of appraisal lowers the tax rate. A decrease increases the tax rate. Next slide, please. So, by the way, just for reference, this is what the common level of appraisal has been doing over the last couple of years. You can see that for a long time, it bounced around a bit, but it was pretty high. Well, it's fallen off a cliff. There's a couple reasons for that. One was that slide way back in the beginning I showed you about inflation rates. Well, one of the things that is subject to inflation is housing costs. Property values are, like everything else in the economy, affected by inflation. Also, the demand, independent of inflation, affects property values. If there are more people wanting to move to an area than there is housing, the cost of housing is going to go up. And we got hit by a double whammy of more inflation, which reflected in property values, and more demand for property, because a lot of people, due to COVID, discovered that, hey, living in a big city isn't necessarily everything it's cracked up to be, and it's sometimes nicer to be in the countryside. So a lot of people decided that they wanted to try this lifestyle instead. So as a result, our property values have gone up. Officially, we're all wealthy now because we have very expensive homes. Doesn't help you because you got to pay the heating bill or the cost of groceries, but nominally you were wealthier than you were before because your property is now worth more than it was. And under this, our common level of appraisal went way down. Next slide, please. So how does that actually work? Well, $1,401 is the property rate that we would have been paying just based on the beginning portions of that process, of that flow chart I showed you. And you can see in the middle there that if the CLA was 1, 1,401 divided by 1 is 1,401. If the CLA had gone up, then the 1,401 divided by 2 is only $700. Our tax rate would have dropped. But unfortunately, the CLA went down. That ratio between the value on the grand list and the value of our property went down. So 1,401 divided by 0.5 is 2,802. So you can see how a relatively small change in the CLA can produce an enormous increase in the tax rate. And this is what happened to us. If you remember, we came in at $2,112 because we got about a 0.63 CLA this year. So that's really driving it. Everything we've done in terms of being a school district that is inviting, that people want to come to, that people are moving to this district, bringing their kids because this is a great district, swamped by this. Everything we did to keep the cost of spending down per pupil, swamped by this. The thing that's driving the tax rate this year is entirely the common level of appraisal, and that's entirely because of the way taxes are raised, not on a local level, even though it feels like you're voting on your local taxes, but really on a state level, according to the state's rules. So next slide, please. This just describes what exactly I talked about and why we've gotten 18.5%. Next slide. The discount I told you about, instead of the cap, well, they gave us 6 cents discount on the pre-CLA. When you run it through all that, that doesn't help a whole lot. Slightly different for income sensitivity. One of the interesting things is that if you look at it, the amount of money we get from the state to help pay what we're doing goes up and down, and it's dropped, as you will see there. Again, this is due to the fact that we're raising money not just to pay for our school operations, but we're helping to pay for all of the school operations across the state, and our share is determined in part by how wealthy we perceive to be relative to other parts of Vermont. And if we aren't doing so well, or federal funds are coming in or something, we can get a lot of money from the state, relatively speaking, or otherwise we can get less money and less support. And this time, because of the CLA and everything, and the fact that we dropped our per pupil spending, we're not getting as much money from the state. Next. So that's basically why we're here we are and why the taxes are what they are. And at this point, if you have any questions, I will attempt to answer them. If you have any questions specifically about the cuts and how they're going to affect the districts, I'm going to let our superintendent and our business manager answer those two types of questions.
You could probably, grab a seat, great. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, come right up to the microphone and introduce yourself to us.
Good morning. My name is Carol Lane. I come from White River Junction, and I have lived here for a long time. I'm also a retired teacher, and both of my children went through the Hartford School District. I am very proud of what we have. But I am really concerned about the taxpayers in our town being able to afford this. Now, one place that I see as a possibility of cuts, on the personnel reductions, I see staff support and teachers that you took out. Have you taken out any administrators? The teachers and the staff are the ones that are on the ground with the kids. The administrators, although they have a job, aren't. So if you want better student scores or whatever, why don't you take out some of the high-paying administrative positions? And I'm going to leave it at that because I understand everything that you said, but I think other people might want to hear the answer to that.
Peter, Tom?
Actually, I was going to address this. Okay. So first of all, when you're talking about administrators, it needs to be understood who you're talking about. In fact, the vast majority of the administrators are the principals and the assistant principals. You got to have a principal for school. We're not going to cut that. So the real sort of bone of contention this last year has been we increased the number of administrators by 1. The position that was hired is a new dean of students position for the middle school. We have been aware that there have been a lot of issues in terms of the middle school. The dean of administrator position was our answer to those problems. There have been a whole host of things that are going on, which I can't really get into, but we lost a principal. We had to just now go through what I perceive to be a very successful hiring of a new principal, but that meant that there were interim principals in place. The middle school, as you all know, is the place where our kids start turning from children into young adults, and all of the changes that they're going through get reflected in their behavior. All of the impacts on everything that happened to them in the preceding years start to come out. And in this case, unfortunately for our current crop of middle schoolers, they're the children of COVID. They're the kids who went through elementary school basically not interacting with anybody because they were at home. They are now in the middle school, and we've had to deal with the impact of kids who are not used to interacting with kids who are trying to relearn that skill in the presence of the disruptions and everything else, and are putting into place a person in the middle school in the face of all of these cuts was driven entirely by the fact that we're trying to meet the needs of those kids.
Great, do we have another question? Please come on up to the microphone. That'll give you a better sense, too, of how many folks are waiting. Yes, sir, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Morning, I'm Dave Twitchell, and I live in Wilder, Vermont. I have to agree with what Carol just said. It's been my question as well, too, in looking at the budget. And I understand where the superintendent's coming from, that every school does need to have a principal. But I still feel that there is probably some wiggle room if they really look at maybe you can reduce an administrator or two. I just read recently where the average salary for a superintendent in the state of Vermont is $174,000. You start thinking about how many administrators we have, and I believe we have at least 10, if not more. That's almost $1 million, because chances are their salaries are running between $90,000 plus. So we're talking about quite a bit of money here that could be cut. But I also feel there's another area that we could be thinking about as a community to cut as well. And it's something that was brought up when I was on the school board several years ago. And that's starting to consolidate the elementary schools. If you start looking at the elementary schools, we have dwindling enrollment. We were at 2,200 when I was on the school board, and I think we're 1,600 at this point? If you're looking at that, you could basically have, and plus we have a building that, by the way, which is in the bond for renewal, is an old building. It's the original high school. It's time for this community to really stop and think, do we really need, as a community, 3 elementary schools? Maybe we should think about consolidation. Thank you.
Peter?
Hello?
Tom? Yeah.
Actually, that's not quite the real truth about where we are. We as a town are actually growing. We are expecting something in the order of 400, is it? Almost 400 new apartments to be opened in the next 3 years. If those apartments have children, which we expect there will be, we're going to have to be prepared to meet those demand. So it actually isn't a case that we're looking to the future and saying that there's decreasing need for students. There's going to be more students coming through than we already have.
Yes, next question. Please introduce yourself to us.
Hi, I'm Sue Buckholtz from the Brockway district, my husband has taught me to say. And I just took on a whole new job on another part of this government. And since my son graduated in 2001, I haven't been paying much attention here. But now the 2 most important people to me in the world are in 3rd and 4th grade at Ottaquechee. So I started paying attention again. And I know that we have had great support from paras and extra people at Ottaquechee, and there are not nearly enough of them. So I can't help but notice in reading what we've got here and looking at this, that you've just cut 2.5 of those positions. And then we're talking about problems in the middle school. Gee, I wonder why. So I would really urge you to make sure there's enough support for the little guys coming up. Okay, and we're working hard not to have one of ours be one of your problems, but you have to help us. Okay, thanks.
So part of that is we tried to do the cuts in ways that would have the least impact on our district. And the easiest way to do that is starting by cutting those positions we couldn't fill. So the vast majority of positions that we're cutting are actually empty positions that have been on our budget because we really, really, really need those people, but there was no pool of applicants to fill those positions. So given the choice between cutting a position that had a person in it or cutting a position that didn't have a person in it, we went after the positions that were already empty.
Yes, next question.
Morning, Hawk Matheny. I'm resident here in Hartford, lived in town about 16 years. Our daughter's a sophomore here at the high school. First of all, thank you for sharing this information this morning. Up till today, it was kind of confusing to sort out all the variables that were contributing to an 18% increase in our property tax. So that's clearer now. I want to thank you for that and recognize the difficult job that you have in trying to balance all these variables. The one question I have, which you might have to research and we can take it later, if my notes are correct, you mentioned an 8% increase in the budget, in the school budget. I'm curious the trend over, say, the last 5 years, if that's average, higher, lower. Just, I think it would be a helpful perspective because the increases that are causing the tax increase are not directly related to that 8% increase, right? They're the outside variables. So
Yeah.
if you need to look that up, I'll hang to have that answer, or maybe you have it now.
I think generally it's been about a 10% increase. More so in the recent years, the double-digit health insurance increases have had a significant factor there, as well as, the post-COVID negotiated agreements, which overall around the state have been some of the highest that we've ever seen. So those two factors together have been kind of the big increases.
Right, and general inflation pressures, yeah.
And if I might explain, I've said this before because it's a sore point with me, but the state took the power to negotiate the cost of health care away from the local school districts. They were under the impression they could do a much better job of it than we have. So whatever increase in the cost of health insurance that ends up flowing through to the taxpayers, we had nothing to do with it.
Right,
We didn't get to negotiate that.
yeah, I understand. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This is very official. Good morning, my name's Erica Fallon. I have 5 kids in the Hartford School District. I'm struck by a few faces I don't see, and that's our state representatives, other than Coach. This is a state problem, and they need to hear how it's impacting our families and our taxpayers. They have failed us. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. We are sending our money to them, and they had a task and they failed us. So I strongly urge anybody that's listening to use your no vote, not on this budget, but to say no to the representatives who failed us, that they need to come back to the table and do better next time for all of the Hartford School District residents and everybody in the state of Vermont. Thank you.
If I can just comment quick.
Yep.
The original budget that was rescinded, which was, over $2 million more than the one that we're proposing to you today and on the 15th. Thank you. If the CLA hadn't been a problem and if the state hadn't messed around with the funding formula, it would have resulted in a 1% to 2% increase on the tax rate. So that shows you what Eric is saying is accurate. So,
Yes, please, go ahead with your question and introduce yourself to us.
My name is Geraldine Williams. I've lived in town for 69 years, and I've seen the school budget passed with a yes affirmative vote for 65 years. I'm an educator. I've spent my life, 53 years, in classrooms and in schools, so I have a pretty good understanding of how they work. I'm also a retired administrator, so I know the role of the administrator and the importance of that in schools. I asked for a detailed line-by-line item budget, so I had a lot of questions about where our budget is in terms, I don't want to hear about it's only 1% or it's only $500 on my tax rate. I want us to look carefully at our spending, and I spent an hour yesterday with the business manager and got some good answers. But I still have a lot of questions about what we could do to reduce our budget in some other ways. For instance, when someone raised the question of administration, we're spending probably around $700,000 just for basic administration. And that's off the top of my head, but it's just graduates more than that. So I'm talking about principals, superintendents, and assistant principals. of our schools. We have other things that we don't even know what they do and why they're there. So we might look at that. There might be some places that we have had the luxury of having, but maybe we don't have the luxury in this time with these issues. I looked at $15,000 for busing for homeless kids. Where are they bused from? And why are we paying that? I looked at bids that are in the maintenance budget for the schools, and yet we have this $21 million bond. So how does this fit? You know, are they included? What are they? We don't know. So I think there's some things that we haven't. I know this is going to be upsetting, but we don't know what's going on in our school district. If you have children in school, you know. There's communication. If you don't, you're a throwaway. And I've said this over and over and over to this board and to the administration. We support our schools. We support our schools. We want to know what's going on in our schools. Open the door. Let us see. Then you won't have any problems at all in terms of funding budgets. Here we have 1, 2, 3 state champions this year from Hartford School District. That's a point of pride. We need to have them at the board meetings and get the recognition. We need to have a parade downtown. So there's lots of things like that that are going on in our Hartford School District that we're proud of, but we don't know. So if we can do anything beyond our budgets to get our communication to everybody in town, we all want to support our kids. Please hear me. Find ways that we can make what's going on in our school district a wonderful thing for all of us to know. And it won't be an issue for us to question what's going on in the budget. But there are things that I think we can look at more carefully, and we have to say to ourselves, what is a wish and what is a need? And the number one priority of schools is to educate our children. And our education scores are not good. So whatever we need to do for our budget to look at how we lift our kids scholastically, that's what we should be doing. And that's putting people inside of the classroom, teachers and kids. And I know that from 53 years. I can tell you, the dean of students may be wonderful for another $100,000. And actually, if we have 2 of them, it's more than $200,000. You could get a lot a lot more for your money with putting extra hands in those classrooms in the middle school. I know middle school from the inside out.
Great, thanks.
You need help.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody wish to comment? Yes.
Just want to clarify some things around administration. It's 430 staff in the school district, 238 teachers, 17 administrators. Okay, we're very thinly staffed in comparison to our neighbors in administration. We've had countless complaints about behavior at the middle school. In December, we added a dean of students. I think it's actually hitting the mark. We need people who are available to deal with those behaviors. Teachers are busy in their classrooms. That's why we did that. In the central office, you're looking at it, 2 people to run a $51 million operation. One of the biggest employers in town. So a lot of the things you mentioned, media and press and news about the school, that all falls on me. I have to either do it myself, which I do the website myself with a little help from Tessa Johnson, and I do the rest. People are constantly complaining they don't hear enough good news. All the schools, the principals do the newsletters. We've hired someone to consult with us, very nominal amount of money to go towards, media and press release. But we work as hard as we can, and we did all the cuts based on who's forward facing, who's working with kids, who's working in classrooms. That's why, most of the positions were positions that aren't filled. We looked at all the administrators. Again, there's 17 administrators. The only thing we've added in the last few years is a dean of students and a director of clinical services because of all the needs the kids have in mental health in that area. So, give you a little lay of the land. So, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah.
And if I may, one other comment. We do need to do a better job of communicating, but we're trying and have tried everything we can think about. We are incredibly aware of that. At the same time, we're also incredibly aware that we have a school board meeting and say 12 times out of 13, nobody shows up. We're there by ourselves. Now it's available on the cable or over the internet, but the fact is we are available. We have stuff posted as much as we can, but we're not multimedia moguls. That's not our job. And the last thing, just because you raised it, the amount of money for busing the homeless, that's due to the fact that A, it's the law, and B, it's the right thing to do. But it's actually the law that if we have a student who is homeless and they move to a different district, we have to bus them here because they want to have continuity of their education. So if they've lost their homes and as a result they are sleeping on the floor in a relative's house, or they have ended up in a shelter somewhere else or something, we pay to bus them back here so that they can continue in the class that they were in before they lost their housing. That's actually that's a law that we have to follow.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, next question, please.
Hi, my name is Sharon Bickle. I live in the village of Hartford. I've been here for 20 years. I'm in the process of retiring. Better?
Great.
Start over?
Sure.
Sharon Bickle. I live in the village of Hartford. I've been here 20 years. I'm in the process of retiring. I'm really worried about property taxes and wondering whether I can stay here or not. I have two questions. The first one is, I'm still confused about the $21 million bond and whether that is going to increase the property taxes further. And I've tried to read about this and I don't get it. Okay. My second question is sort of, when I walked in, what I heard was that the idea that there was going to be an 18% increase and that was what you guys were aiming for, and yet I know inflation is high, but the inflation was this past year 6.5, and so basically we're looking at something that's 3% or 3 times more than the inflation rate. Even 2 times more would be easier to swallow for me. And so it seems like the whole budget was based on a premise of this is the goal, an 18% increase in property taxes. And I guess that seems like a faulty premise to me. Thank you.
Okay, 2 questions there. Maybe the first one, somebody want to talk about the property tax impact of this versus the bond issue, which we'll get to in a minute.
So the bond presentation is coming. There is no impact in this budget because of the bond. There will be impacts in future years, but in this particular year, there's none because we are using money we had set aside for doing maintenance to pay for the bond, because the bond is going to address that. And it made sense to use the money we had set aside for that purpose to fund the first year of the bond.
Okay, and the general inflation question?
General inflation is a real issue. By the way, I truly do sympathize with you about your situation. The economy we are in is extraordinarily difficult for those who are trying to figure out how to transition from work to retirement, or even just those who are on low incomes generally. There's no getting around that. Unfortunately, that's a situation that school boards, despite our enormous power, have nothing to do, can't do anything about. But as I said, in this case, this increase was driven entirely by the CLA. If you'd gone by expenditure per pupil, it would have gone down. If you had gone by yield, it would have gone down. All of these things, the only thing that's driving it really is the CLA issue.
Are you going to talk now? Okay. Yes, sir. Next question.
Bruce Riddle, Town of Hartford. What happens if this budget fails?
I'm sorry I missed that. I was being interrupted.
Question is, what happens if this budget fails?
We try again. Ultimately, if we get to the start of the new fiscal year, there are statutory language that governs what happens in the absence of an approved budget. Basically, we operate off of last year's budget with 89% of what? Yeah. So it's a reduced version of last year's budget, but it's more or less taken out of our hands at that point unless we can somehow get a budget passed. Do you want to talk to that?
We continue to try to pass a budget until July 1st, and if we can't, then we operate off of 89% of last year's or this current year's budget, and we borrow money, and the taxpayers have to foot the interest on that money that we borrow. So timing-wise, maybe, we can get another budget, maybe two, before we have to actually resort to borrowing money to pay for next year's costs.
And if I may, this is one of the disadvantages of going from a town meeting system to a Australian ballot system. If we had the town meeting system, we just sit here until we come up with something and there's an answer. The last time we did that, we had about, I think, 8 hours of town meeting, and we eventually came up with a budget which was ultimately exactly the budget we had started with. One of those nice ironies of political life.
Great.
But the big thing is this particular do-over is paid for by the state. Future do-overs won't be. So if this budget goes down, we have to do another vote, Australian ballot. All of those costs are going to be borne by the taxpayers.
Yes, next question.
Eric Francis, White River Junction. I have a daughter in the 11th grade here. I'm curious if the CLA is the monster driving this, as you repeatedly noted here, what would be the ideal solution? You're squeezing a balloon and it's coming down in the CLA. What would get us back out of that? And just, I realize that, as you just pointed out, we're staring down the barrel of this year, but what's going to happen next year and the year after? And that's probably a question for Kevin, but is this going to be an ongoing problem? Are we likely to ever see that number come back up? And I'm sorry, just where I'm really trying to get big picture here. What is if we had an ideal solution, what would it be? More pupils, more housing, what's the lever we're not pulling on this?
So the way the CLA doesn't drive it is when the CLA approaches 1, and that's dependent on having done a reassessment of the property in town. The town manager has assured us that they're in the process of working to get that done. So the expectation is that next year, the CLA is going to be either 1 or very, 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 very close to 1, because we will have just done another appraisal. How quickly the grand list valuation goes out of sync with reality, I don't know, but it should buy us a certain amount of time. Additionally, there is always the chance that the folks in Montpelier can come up with an answer. Part of the problem is,
Peter, why don't we let's have Coach have a chance to
sorry,
to speak to that?
No, go ahead. Next question.
Okay.
Even lower here. Okay. Becky Chalet, Town of Hartford. I just want to start by thanking you all for rescinding the original budget and working really hard to come up with something that's slightly more bearable. And I totally acknowledge all the factors that are completely out of your control in terms of determining the budget. So I appreciate all the work that you guys have been putting in. And it seems like no matter how you slice it, unless you cut half of the teaching staff, we are going to have a very painful increase in our property tax this year. And so I guess and fingers crossed, when the town reappraisals occur, et cetera, some of these things will hopefully change so that we won't be looking at this next year as well and in future years. So I guess my question is really not for any of you, but more thinking about Town of Hartford officials. What is the town doing in preparation for the fact that there will probably be a significant number of residents who won't be able to afford their property taxes in the coming year? So what support is there for residents from the Town of Hartford, or maybe the state? I have no idea. I realize that is not a question for you guys, but that's what I'm thinking when I'm hearing all of this is, even if we vote this budget down, there's still going to be an increase in our property taxes regardless of what budget gets passed this year. It's unavoidable. So my question is what is the town doing to prepare for that there are probably people who won't be able to afford their taxes?
Coach, here's a chance if you want to speak to the issue maybe from a broader perspective, as Eric was asking, and Becky.
Good morning, everyone. Listening to a lot of the questions that intersect with our work locally and then with what the legislature is doing. There's drivers here. The first one, those of you who have been around for a while understand that there have been 5 different funding formulas that have impacted every school in the state of Vermont over the last 30 years. Normally, what occurs is those funding formulas are actually revamped about every 5 years. The particular formula that we are using now that's basically created this mess has been in existence 16 years. It should have been totally revamped, especially following the Brigham decision, and that's a big driver. The reason that we're here, this morning, and we were able to be here this morning with the board's decision, as Peter mentioned, the bill 850 allowed school districts that saw this occurrence, this major increase occur, had the option to either put their budget through as it was voted on by its board to the public, or rescind and have the state cover that difference. The purpose of that was to buy time for the voters to get an opportunity to move forward. Some districts just went ahead and said, hey, we're just going to put the budget out. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, well, then we'll deal with it. Your board decided not to do that. We tried, to the best of our ability, to come up with a plan that readjusted those numbers. So now switch back into the other part of the work. At the state level, there was a bill that was passed that was supposed to help that waiting number that Peter told you about. You know, how much does it cost to educate a child at each grade level? And there is a difference, you know, in that cost. And that is a variable in how the state calculates what gets sent back from the ed fund to us. So we generate our budget. You know, we have 1,561 students. Those 1,561 students now, under Act 127, have a new weight value. So that's what started this imbalance piece. Then you add all of the other factors that Peter mentioned, you know, in the presentation, and you can start to see where they weren't gonna work. What the legislature's been working on, that first step, was to pass 850 to give us a chance as school boards to kind of regroup, so to speak, and get a new set of numbers to the state. Because there's one number that Peter mentioned in the presentation, which is the yield value. That final yield number does not come out to all of the school districts until the end of the legislative session, which is in about 3 weeks. At that point, what you will see, because it has happened every single year for the last 12 years, is that yield number, generally for Hartford, has helped our tax rate in a good way. And a lot of that is because of the factors that we've mentioned with some of your other questions. Right now, there's so much pressure, you know, on those dollars that are coming back. And remember, the ed fund is a guarded fund. The state does not use that fund for anything other than education of our children. It's not like the general fund where people can go and make a request and draw from it. It's only for our kids. But as many of you remember, when we had the Brigham decision, which said, and that was a state decision at the Supreme Court level, that said Vermont will equalize its tuition for all of its kids throughout the state. And that's why that money flows back and forth in this weird way. You'd think what we collect in taxes is ours to do with what we need to do with, but it doesn't work that way.
Great, thanks, Kevin.
So if that helps.
Yep, thanks. Yes, next question on the school budget proposal.
Hi, thank you. My name's Christina. I have a son at Ottaquiti School. I used to be the chief of staff in the Baltimore City Public School System, and we need to do this with a $1.2 billion budget, but the work you're doing is exactly the same, and the issues are no smaller. So I want to thank you for all the work I know you're doing, because I know it's a lot of work. This is actually a follow-up to the question of what happens if it doesn't pass. My impression is that if it doesn't pass, the choices only get worse. That our responsibility now as taxpayers is to, or voters, not taxpayers, choose from among the best of bad decisions. And a practical question I want to ask related to that. The Ottaquechee School will not have a 5th grade next year. I'm sorry, it'll have a 5th grade. It won't have any 5th grade teachers. Is there a hiring freeze on making new offers? Like, what are the practical implications of not having a budget? Teachers' contracts renew for even teachers we already have. Are we in danger of losing teachers to other districts because they're not going to stay here, even if they have a position? Are there positions that are protected where you can make offers and field a 5th grade at Ottaquechee School, even as you're hoping and praying a budget comes through? So, and I'll sit down for this. I just wanted to understand the practical implications at the school if these budgets don't get passed.
Thanks.
Tom?
Tom, yeah, you spoke to that a little bit. You want to follow up?
Obviously, that's a huge worry. We have approximately 2 months from the 15th until June 30, 2.5 months. So we would have to come back with a budget that we would hope would pass. Obviously, the school board will, if the budget on the 15th fails, the school board will really analyze the margin by which it fails and try to figure out what a new proposal should look like. The bigger the margin, the more the reduction, I would assume. And present that. You have to warn it for 30 days. So once the decision's made and the budget number is arrived at, then you have 30 days to warn that, file with the town clerk, warn the budget, do a meeting like this again, and see if the townspeople will support it. If that was to fail, you do that whole process again. There might be time for 2 more attempts. I hope we don't get there, but in my estimate, there might be time for 2 more attempts. We are obligated to fund the contracts that we release on the 16th. If the budget fails, the board could consider additional cuts in any part of the budget. So it's pretty bleak. The next round of cuts would be very painful. A lot of the cuts in this budget are, like Peter said, were positions that weren't filled. We cut what we could out of supplies and equipment. Certainly a next round would be positions with people in them and services that we would be hard-pressed to do without: transportation, athletics, extracurriculars, transportation. So it would be very, very difficult. I don't know if I answered the question entirely.
Good, yeah, thanks, Tom. Okay, I'm mindful that the clock is continuing the hands are spinning around the dial here. We've been here for a little while. To some extent, we're going to continue with this type of conversation into our next question. So if anybody has something very specific to the budget, this is a great time. Otherwise, we will move into discussion of the proposed bond issue, which of course has implications. Yeah, Kevin.
Just very quickly, around our student count number, what we will prepare for you is a year-on-year comparison, of our numbers of students. Over the last 5 years, our actual numbers have been increasing, and we will show you how that is happening. The big year when Mr. Twitchell was on the board was my daughter's class here at Hartford, which was, they called the bubble class. There were 232 graduating seniors in that class. It was the biggest class in Hartford's history. And I think, that is telling. I don't know what happened, like that particular year, but they were who they were. And I think you were teaching, that time too, Ms. Lane, during that bubble period.
Great.
But very, very quickly, I was looking at the chart that's in your packet, and please take a look at where our students are coming from now. We are increasing, we have almost 80 kids from Heartland, for example. We have New Hampshire students who have choice that are coming to Hartford. So we're attracting students from the surrounding area, to come to Hartford. And there's a pretty clear breakdown, not just the tech center. From grade 7 through the high school, take a peek at those numbers. There's an additional 121 students. And if you look at that per pupil spending and start to look at every time you add a student, that actually does drive our tax rate down. So trying to make our school attractive is critical.
Thanks, Coach. Okay, Geraldine, we'll give you the last question here on the budget.
So those students, Coach, that you just described that are coming to Hartford, those are students from surrounding towns that have choice to come to the high school, for instance?
Anywhere they choose.
Yeah, okay. I get that. Okay, I have two things, two facts, I guess. One is that, as in all Vermont towns, right now, we are the boomers. So the largest portion of citizens in most Vermont towns are seniors. So we're already retired, and we are living on retirement funds like Social Security. So when we're talking about 18% as not being, that's what we're trying for, you have to remember, if we get a 3%, we think that's, wow. Most of the time we get 1. So how do we make up the 17%? You have to think about those things for us as citizens. I'm interested in two questions. One is that we have a position that is an equity director, and I don't know if that's an administrative position or what kind of a position. I'm wondering what that is all about, and we're spending a lot of money for it, so I want to know, what we're getting back for it. And number two is, what exactly is our per pupil spending?
Okay, 2 questions there to close out this section. Anybody want to speak about the equity director?
Tom?
The equity coordinator is a teaching position. For the last several years, equity, diversity, inclusion have become a big issue in schools across Vermont. Hartford was one of the first to have our dedicated staff person help implement policy, procedure, instructional practices that make education accessible to all kids, no matter where they come from or what their background is or nationality or native language. And that's what our equity coordinator's done. Our school board has been very progressive with policies, anti-racism policies, equity policies, gender inclusivity policies to support all of our kids. Very proud of the work we've done. We sort of lead the state in this area with a couple other really strong districts, but that's what our equity coordinator does, and it's really vital to what we do. We have one person, we probably need 2 or 3, but we have one person who does a really good job, and depends on teachers in each school to implement the policies and procedures and practices.
Great, thanks.
With respect to the student spending, what I can give you is the spending per weighted student, since that's the way the state makes us figure it out. And I'm going to give you some context by starting in 2023. And so in 2023, it was $18,567.11. In 2024, that fell to $14,142.94. And the budget that we are proposing falls further to $14,097.25.
Great, thanks, Peter.
One clarification here. In the packet for FY24, what I did is I took the long-term weighted average number. And I treated that as what would that look like with the, the long-term weighted average. So equalized pupil as the long-term weighted average would be, the 1969-41. If you look at last year's packet, when we use just the equalized pupil number, that cost per pupil was $21,232.04. But for this year, I wanted it to be a real apples-to-apples comparison, so I redid that number for FY24.
Yeah, the state changed the formula slightly, how they wanted us to look at that number.
Yeah, Tom.
One quick thing, if I may. If you look on the Vermont State Education Tax for Hartford School District, it's part of your packet. Pay particular attention to line 5, long-term weighted average, formerly equalized pupils. FY23, 1,345 students. FY24, 1,969 students. FY25, 2,117 students. So based on the formula that the state uses to weight our students, we've increased dramatically in the last couple of years. And I see that trend to continue, especially with 390 housing units coming online in the next 3 years, 100 of which will be online now or in the very, very near future, like for FY25, this budget season.
Okay, we're going to move on to the second item on our agenda for today, which is a presentation and discussion of a proposed bond issue, which will also be on the ballot a week from Monday. So, Sarah, why don't I introduce you and you can get us started on this next item.
Good morning, everyone. Chuck is very tall. Thank you. Hi, my name is Sarah Campbell. I'm here once again to ask for your support on the school bond. This is a tough act to follow, the budget presentation. We know that this process has been very drawn out, and I'm looking to just quickly present this kind of from an aspirational point of view. I'm not going to focus on data and statistics. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I, as a parent of 2 kids in this district, I'm a project manager, so this kind of information is part of my livelihood. I'm also incredibly involved in the town and the school board, and I'm a taxpayer. And I still believe that this is the right way to go. This bond is very important. We've already discussed consolidation a little bit today, but when my family first moved to the Upper Valley, Hartford was in our top choice. Mostly the community, the opportunities. We liked the school district. We were looking at a lot of potential for our family. And there was uncertainty about closing the White River School at that point. And, we live in downtown, near downtown, and, my kid on a bus for an hour was distressing to me, a kindergartner being taken to the Quechee School or the Dothan Brook School. So I think that there's a lot of pride in our elementary schools, and I want to say that as we grow, I think that's going to become a big part of this picture. Next slide, please. So the bond components, we have a 5-year schedule for capital renewal. We have the development of a master facility plan and the development of a district growth and catchment study. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan for the infrastructure piece, and then I'll be back to talk about the other 2 pieces.
Hi, folks. Put this back to Chuck height. Thanks. I'm Jonathan Garther, the facilities director here. Had some notes, but I think I'll just go to the first slide. This is the door that we just came in, the door into the gym. I was thinking about that on the way in, and what I was thinking is, my job involves kind of drilling into the big picture to the smaller issues, and that's kind of what this bond is about. It's the big picture and the small issues. This is, that entrance comes in right out here, and if you look closely on your way out, you'll see the details on the sides where it's just rusting, it's just old. It's beyond patch and paint. It's time for significant work or renewal. And that's, drilling into just that entryway and some very specific issues, but it's indicative of the larger question. When you come in through that door, you come into this glass hallway, which was built, Jeff knows when, I'm sure, a while ago. And if you take a left, you end up in this gym, which gets used probably as much as any facility in the district, has a floor which cannot be refinished again, and is reaching end of its usable life for competitive play and performance. Locker rooms that don't meet the cut for what we need to do. If you take a right, you go into the old B wing, which has some similar issues. So in talking about what the bond would do very selfishly for me from my desk is it allows me to look at these big issues while I'm drilling into these fixes and make sure we incorporate those activities together. And that formula kind of plays out over and over and over again. So the next slide, I think, is, this is the north stairs. If you go out the north end of this building, out of the tech, there's a set of concrete stairs that, again, I've only been here 2 years, so I'll give you my version of history. Was built, I think, with the idea that kids would get dropped off in the lower parking lot and go up them from the buses, and never really panned out. Not a great design when it was built, no harm, no foul. I think they probably did the best they could with what they had, but they've been failing for a long time, and now we have water leaching through. It's compromised. The concrete, the structure, they're not really safe to use anymore. Fortunately, we still have emergency egress in place, so it's okay. But again, it's past patch and paint to the point where we really got to look at a major fix. But again, I think we'd be remiss if we just looked at a major fix without thinking about the big picture of what's that end of the building going to be used for down the road. How are those programs both at the tech and high school going to develop so that that whole front entry there, north entry rather, at the end of this repair serves not just the immediate need, but the needs of future development. And then, when we started looking into that with the engineers about how to fix it, we ended up in the basement of the building, which is a dirt basement under the tech, lovingly known as the catacombs. And we have water infiltrating through that concrete staircase into the catacombs, creating a damp situation that's been in place for years. Again, this isn't something that just happened, that we just stumbled upon. It's just a long-term, when you have old buildings, you deal with these issues. The picture on the left is one of the footings down there that is just, the concrete has degraded, it's rusting, it needs to be repaired. The picture on the right is water leaking into the main electrical room for the high school. And that's, again, we look at, I was asked to look at those concrete stairs outside, and you look at this big picture, you drill in, and sometimes you find a much larger issue. And that is indicated here. And then the next slide, I think, is the middle school. Way back, sometimes it seems like a long time ago, and sometimes it seems like a week ago when I did my interview, Tom and I walked around, and we walked behind the middle school, and I said, there's something going on, there's some leaching around the windows, I don't know, and he was like, yeah, we got a water problem. Well, the picture's on the other side of the ceiling of the music room in the middle school, which I decided to tear down and expose because it was wet and I didn't want it to get moldy. But right now, they're teaching music classes in that room, looking up at the bare structure of the building, and as of yesterday, we still have active leaks through that wall. It's not something that I can fix with caulk. It's a problem that I understand goes way back to the installation of the what I was told, the new windows in 1980 something. And it really needs a very broad look at that whole facade, that middle picture, where we have water beating the envelope of the building and getting into that space. And again, it's not a matter of just stopping the leaks. It's a matter of, okay, it's leaking and it's affecting the music room. Before I leap into that, we have to take a step back and say, okay, that's the music room today, but as people bring up like different uses for different schools, should we be fixing it, just putting it back in place as it is, or should we be looking at a more dynamic approach of facilities planning? So the purpose of the bond for me is to address the reality that I can't just allow buildings to leak, and I can't allow water to leak into the electrical room, and I can't allow, kids to play on a floor that is potentially at some point going to become unsafe for competitive play. But at the same time, just putting a Band-Aid on these things doesn't really address the long view that the community and the district deserves in terms of facilities planning. That's why there's these different components to the bond that involve just the money to fix stuff right now, but concurrently bringing in the resources that we need, the engineering resources, the planning resources that I admittedly just don't have the chops to do, so that we're not taking short steps forward that lead to long steps back. And I think, I would just close out my comments on that. I'll try to be brief because it hasn't been a brief morning. Back to that entry into this space. One of the major components of this bond is the planning and execution of a new fire alarm and sprinkler system for this building. When you come in that door and take a left through the glass hallway, forget about the rust, forget about all that. You walk into this, forget about the floor for a minute. There's no sprinkler system in here at all, which very quickly is going to become a limitation of how we use this space. I've been to 2 graduations since I've been here, which is not a lot. Last year we were in here and it was a bit warm. We were in here with the cooperation and assistance of the fire marshal to make sure we could use the space safely with the numbers of people we had to have in here. We can't keep doing that forever. At some point we have to address the elephant in the room, which is these facilities deficiencies are going to limit the use of the facilities and ultimately the experience that students have here. So that's my little pitch for this bond. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. Oh. Thank you, Chuck. So Jonathan has talked about the significant infrastructure considerations. These are a pivotal aspect of this bond. I'm not going to try to gloss over that. But there are also real challenges around maintaining and upgrading 450,000 square feet of space. We also need to work in the future to establish appropriate operating funds to keep up with these things going forward. The needs are ever evolving. But I want to talk about aspirations, because that's the fun part. The 2 pieces of this bond, the master facility plan and the district growth and catchment study, are investments in what we want for our students. Let's look at the development of our district over time as we've grown and changed. So, next slide. So, 1884, the picture reflects that. The town built the high school to consolidate a combination of public and private schools in the area, and they did an expansion just 9 years later. In the next slide, the White River School was built in 1907, and the students moved there, and the high school became our municipal building. In this next slide, our district grew, and in 1952, we built the Memorial School, and it housed elementary grades 1 through 3 and 7 and 8. And thank you for some of my longtime residents helping me with all this history. Next slide. In 1960, the changes with 89 and 91 were on our town leaders' minds, and the forward-thinking decision was made to build the high school. It opened in 1963, and its enrollment doubled within 4 years of its opening. And then in 1970, the Memorial School changed, around 1970, I'm not positive, changed to a middle school for grades 5 through 8. In 1990, we invested in our 2 new elementary schools and moved our 5th graders to those schools. And in 2019, we revitalized the Wilder School. So we think of these buildings in their modern use, but they've shifted over time, time and time again, as our community has grown and changed. So the other big change that we have is the way we educate our children. Our newest school was opened in 1994. And our schools actually need to evolve to meet our 21st century programmatic needs. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with these studies. So the catchment and growth study will engage a firm that can bring expertise and objectivity into optimizing our catchment areas, projecting our student enrollment, and planning for any necessary infrastructure. We'll evaluate the use and allocation of all of our existing facilities and make recommendations for upgrades or expansions to accommodate specific educational needs. And then the big thing about this is that this is where we're going to need engagement. We're going to want input from all of our stakeholders, including our students, our staff, and our administrators, our parents and caregivers of all kinds, and you, our citizens and business owners. We really do want to foster a sense of ownership and support for these shared resources. And then using what we've learned in that study that I just previously described, we want to engage in a master facilities plan. We're really looking at the potential of our district for the next 30 years. So it's not a small goal. We're looking to ensure cost efficiency, improve the quality of both our facilities and our programs, and strategic alignments with education goals. We're looking to look ahead and anticipate needs, create facilities that support high-quality education, and creating a campus conducive to experiential learning, modernizing all of our labs, outfitting our libraries for the modern usage, and really looking at how we can have impact on our students over a long period of time. So, performing arts, big involved groups in our community put on amazing work throughout the year. We'd really like to take advantage of the gateway of this campus, which is the revitalization of Highland Avenue, for our music and theater programs and our community use. We would like to think about performing arts center on that stretch, and also facilities to house our district staff and superintendent's offices. Next. And then, as already has been mentioned in this room, our athletics department. Our athletics are a huge source of pride for Hartford, and upgrades to these facilities will allow our programs to grow and flourish. There are great needs here. We've already talked about this particular room. Like, what about the heart of our community? We vote in here. Our kids get sent off into the larger world in this room, and it needs an upgrade. There are a lot of things that we can do in this space if it was modernized that we can't do right now. Similar to a swim weekend, right? You drive around here in the UVAC and there's parking and there's hundreds of people that have come over from all over the state and the region. We can imagine that here. Hartford has the potential to be a regional hub for these types of events, both athletic and in arts. This would allow people to participate from all over the region and spend their money and their time in our town, and it brings prestige to our district and lots of opportunities for our students. I think this might be my last slide. So this just isn't about buildings. It's about investing in our children, our community, what we want this community to look like in the future, building on our past success, embracing change, and really creating a legacy of educational excellence. All right, lots of boring background. Here's the ask. We're asking you to support a bond for $21 million. You can give them the slide, Tom. The term of the bond is for 20 years. As has been mentioned, the first year, and Jacob will be able to answer better questions, but the first year we're using facilities funding to pay the bond payment, and then it will become part of the larger property taxes. It would not be an additional tax on your education property taxes. The financing cost is $9,165,000, $975, sorry. And the total cost is $30,165,975,000. Thank you guys for indulging me. I'm giving it back to Chuck.
Okay, we've heard from Sarah and Jonathan some of the details of the bond proposal that's on the ballot. Does anybody have any questions for either of them? If so, come on down to the microphone.
Sharon Bickle again. I still don't understand how this will affect the property taxes. If it's not going to affect this year, how is it going to affect it in subsequent years?
So it's because of all of the things that Peter described. Projecting is hard to be precise, but we're looking at about $78 per $100,000 of value on your home if all things remained equal. And that is not income sensitivity, so there's some wildly ups and downs around that. But that is kind of the gross figure for the bond payment, if that helps.
In this year's budget, there's $715,000 on the expense side and the revenue side, so the bond is being completely funded by reserve funds. Next year, we would use the remaining reserve funds, which would be about 400,000. So we would be adding, a net effect of, 1.4 million because we'll have the principal in FY '26. So we'd be adding about 1.4 million to the budget for next year. And then as far as, what that effect would be on the budget, it's a little bit uncertain because we don't know the CLA, the yield information, or what our equalized pupils will look like. So all of those factors together will have an impact on what the actual tax rate ends up being.
Dave Twitchell again. I have a question. First of all, I want to commend the work that you've done in putting together a proposal to benefit the students of this community. And, time and again, we've heard all day today that we support the school district, so I think that that's great. Number one, very impressed with what you did with showing us from the infrastructure of what needs to be repaired, and obviously that needs to be handled and taken care of because we're talking about the safety of the students, so I think that's number one. But the question that I have is, I believe we have some outstanding bonds that we've paid, that we're still paying on for the past with the White River was in the equation, Wilder School renovation was in the equation. Is there anything else that we're still outstanding?
There's a few bonds that are in the packet, but there's, some with the high school and the parking lot as well.
Okay. So we obviously have monies expended for the future that we have to pay as taxpayers. And I was relieved to actually learn something today to hear that we're not going to actually absorb this into this next budget cycle. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to be able to pass this coming school year budget. But I'm concerned about the future because now we're going to be adding additional monies from a bond perspective. And although I love the thoughts of what you want to do in renovating, has there been any thought to trying to portion this out from an affordability perspective? So for example, you were demonstrating what was needed obviously at the middle school and at the high school. And I'm sure there are things there that you want to do from an educational perspective, which I think would be great to bring this up to date where we belong in the 21st century. But have we thought about, I was looking at the original bond proposal, which showed that White River was going to have money allocated, Ottaquechee was having money allocated, Dothan-Brook was going to have money allocated, which I think is great, but have we thought about pushing that off? Can we make the chunk a little bit smaller than what we're actually doing right now? Because that's additional money. And although you're basically saying that's going to be $78 or $74 on the $1,000 of property value, that still adds up in the end. And it really does come down to affordability in this community, because tack that on to your school budget, tack that onto your town budget, you're talking about pretty expensive property taxes, and you do have a large senior citizen population that is going to bear the brunt of this. And it's not that people don't want to pay for it, it's a question of can they pay for it? And I think that's the biggest concern. Thank you.
Sure, I hear you. I mean, I pay property taxes too. I think one of the things that is a little esoteric and hard to kind of get my head around and hard to explain is that a lot of the work that we need to do is slightly fluid. Over the course of the next few years, Jonathan's going to be working really diligently to do all of those things on that list. And so, delaying the bond another year, which was a valid question that we discussed when I was on the school board, it doesn't give us the flexibility that we need to take care of the life safety and the imminent needs that we have. We've talked about the sprinklers, but also allow us to make those choices in a very thoughtful and cost-effective way. So, and Jonathan may have better examples than me, but if we replaced something that we bought in 1980 with the exact same thing, it might not actually be the right object for our future use of the buildings, for how we're gonna support our students going forward. So kind of the three pieces going hand in hand are intentionally designed to make sure that we're not doing rework and we're making really high quality but low cost decisions for you guys. So I get it. It's a lot of money up front and we are all struggling with a crazy tax year. But I also think that not doing this now and in the manner that which we've chosen is going to cost us significantly more in the long run. I just budgeted, and I'm gonna use a personal example, I just budgeted a project in July of 2023 that came in at $15 million, and then due to delays and waiting, I'm now spending $23 million on that project, and that's in 7 months. So we're in an environment where this type of work is incredibly volatile, and the earlier we can get plans and dedicated funds on these, the less it's going to cost us in general. Do you have anything to add?
Sure. You talked about money being allocated to Ottaquechee and some of the other schools, a brief kind of statement on that. Looking specifically at Ottaquechee, say, there was a concern that was brought to me about a doorway that had failed on the north side of that building, the uphill side. We looked at that and realized that it had failed because it had rusted, and then I got a complaint about a musty spell in the classroom, and it has turned into a drainage problem on that side of the building. So really, I wouldn't be doing my job if I just put a new door in, even though the original request was to replace the door, because we don't just need to replace the door, we need to fix the drainage problem so we don't have moisture in the building, so we can fix the door for 20 years, not 2. And then at the same time, we should be looking at the reality that that part of the property is also where they do a lot of their outdoor education. There's an outdoor meeting space there, there's a playground planned there, and there's some opportunity there to reduce costs by taking on these projects concurrently. But that requires a very intentional and well thought out planning process. So it really is, there's two pieces to this. There's letting me just afford the nuts and bolts to make things tight, but at the same time, making sure that we're doing that in a way that envisions future use and needs.
Okay, next question.
Let me start with the observation of looking at Woodstock, which just had their $99 million bond fail. And what I'm hoping is that if this bond passes and it's executed perfectly, it'll avoid building a new school in the next 10 years. But the issue that I want more clarification on is PCBs. There's a bunch of schools in Vermont that may have to be taken down because of high levels of PCBs. Our schools are old enough that they could have a PCB problem and a PFAC problem. How is this bond going to make sure we do this right? And the other thing is, when my kids were in the middle school, in the fall and spring it was an oven. Nobody learned in 90 degrees. My youngest one fell dead asleep. Are we going to air condition these schools? We're going to have to air condition these schools. How are we going to provision for that in the future?
Thanks, Bruce. Bruce Riddle, White River Junction.
So to the PCB question first, that's a state mandated program to look at the schools and see what we have in place as far as PCB materials and what risk they may or may not pose. The priorities were set by the state, and what was brought to us as priorities were White River Elementary, the middle school, and the high school. Some months ago, it starts with a survey where a team comes in and looks at the materials and says what's suspect, what's suspicious, and then it's followed up with air testing. We did the survey at the middle school and followed up with testing and came up clear. We have no problems at the middle school. We've fulfilled our obligation. We can check that box. We're done. Sometime after that, we did the survey in White River and here. And this coming week, taking advantage of the school break, we're doing testing in this building. And then in late May, we're doing testing in White River. So for me, it's a question of quantifying the situation. We're going to meet our appropriate regulatory requirements in the process mandated by the state in terms of surveying and testing. We had a great outcome at the middle school. We have no issues. I don't know what the outcome will be at White River or here, And the only way I will address that is by saying, A, I'm not going to try to imagine a solution to a problem I can't quantify. But it makes all the more important to me a really robust and dynamic planning process, because if we do find out that there's a problem in one of these schools, that should absolutely impact the work that we plan to do. It's that, no little steps forward for big steps back. We want to know that before we proceed. So there's the obvious life safety piece, which the state has mandated, and we're doing all that. And then there's the other piece, which is knowing what we have so we can incorporate that information into our overall plan.
Becky Chalet, Town of Hartford. I have a question and then a comment. My question might be for finance. I'm just wondering, with school bonds, is the interest on school bonds affected by inflation in the same way that mortgages and business loans and stuff like that? In other words, if we lock into a bond this year at an astronomically high interest rate, will we have that? And will we have the opportunity, fingers crossed, in a year or two when interest rates come down, to renegotiate the school bond and the terms of the bond? So that's my question.
So yes, inflation does affect bond rates and, everything with the market now. Obviously, politics, the rest of the world and all that affects it. The way things are looking now, because I've been talking to the bond bank a couple times, like, hey, how are rates looking? The last quote I got was like 3.8%. So depending on, when we actually lock into the bond, that would be, the actual rate that we end up with. Because I think we quoted, 4.03%. But depending on when we lock in with the bond bank officially, that would be our rate.
So they can't be renegotiated the way mortgages can, for example, that you know of?
I'm not entirely sure.
Well, that might be something to look into on the off chance that they can, and we can take advantage of that. But, okay, and then my comment is, if this bond does not pass because people are already having sticker shock with the likely property tax increase, I am wondering, or just putting in my my hope for the possibility that you guys could come back to us in August or November when we're back here voting for possibly a smaller bond of the absolute necessary things that don't require the big picture perspective, that we can just fund and get taken care of, if there are any of those, and there may not be. And I super appreciate the fact that you are taking the big picture perspective so that we don't do foolish reactionary repairs that then cost us much more down the road when we go, oops, actually we're going to take this whole wall down. So I really appreciate the thought that's going into this, and I'm afraid that the town isn't going to be able to stomach this bond right now. And so I hope that maybe there's a way to sort of parcel out the absolute necessity for later this year, and then coming back to us in March with the bigger picture once we hopefully have some solutions for next year's school budgets. So thank you for your work.
I agree with you. We've talked about splitting it up and how that would work. There is opportunity to go back at the primaries and at the general election in November. And I fully appreciate your comments. It fulfills what we're looking for, which is spending a lot of money to fix problems. Today's problems without tomorrow in mind will, in the long run, cost us more money.
Next question.
Elise Holzberg from Queechee. Sarah, I was wondering if you can talk about where we've been in terms of the list that was once created by the school board and trying to check off our needs list. I know the schools have gone through an amazing amount of renovations and work. So for those people here and at home who are thinking, how do these things all of a sudden happen? How are we suddenly discovering these things? I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and help to reassure us how we're creating this list and where you expect for us to go.
I'm going to let Jonathan answer most of that, but I will say, and I mentioned this in my presentation, that it's hard to fund operations properly. And so one of the struggles that boards have had in the past and that we'll really need to follow through with our boards in the future is making sure that we're appropriately allocating maintenance and renovation funding to our district, because otherwise you get into situations like this where, the first thing that gets cut is what is considered to be less important money, and it tends to fall into this bucket.
So when we first sat down a year or so ago to talk about how to fund these issues, one of the first things we did is we tried to break it out into a couple categories, one being life safety, that's always first and foremost for me, daily, weekly. Another being support for programs, educational and extracurricular, and another being the aspirational desire of the community and the district. And at one point, we actually had this enormously annoying spreadsheet that I built it was color-coded by each of those, and we went through and we tried to prioritize and reprioritize. And the reason we came to the bond we have is because we realized there's so much crosswalk between those categories that we should really address them concurrently. Now, we could, and we have gone through the exercise of just pulling out the immediate life safety requirements, and that's something that can be done. That could only be done reasonably, with all due respect, at the expense of some of the aspirational thinking. And I have been saying since I got here to the folks who work for me that I don't do emergencies. Like, we can have an issue, we can have a problem, occasionally a crisis, but not an emergency, because all the rules go out the window. And what I'd like to avoid, if possible, is getting to the point where we have to sacrifice support or aspirations to deal with emergencies.
Yes, next question.
Hawk Matheny, resident here in Hartford. I have a question on the 21 million total, and as a fellow manager of complex facilities, I understand the challenge of trying to address immediate needs at the same time. If there's a design flaw, as you pointed out, that's short-term investment with minimal long-term gain. Believe in the approach of do it right rather than do it over. So I think your presentation shared that. But it wasn't clear in the 21 million how much, like say percentage-wise or by dollars, is dealing with the immediate needs that can't be deferred versus the investment in planning, design, and development over time. Do you have a sense of that ratio-wise?
Yeah. Less than $500,000 of the bond is specifically going to consultants, people outside of our facility, outside of our district, sorry. The primary funds are going to go into our buildings, with a lot of that work could be directed straight at fix and replace, or we could thoughtfully put it together in a way to make sure that we get more for that money in order to, do more aspirational things. But the figure is basically the grand total of the things that kind of have to be done, if that helps you understand. Yeah. And we're hoping to get more out of that money by making much better choices about what we are doing with it. Right. Does that help?
Yeah, that does.
Okay,
thanks.
thank
you.
Hi, I'm Kim Dumont from White River Junction. What is the time frame that you have in mind for this planning, the 30-year plan that we keep talking about putting into place? I guess that's my first question. And then my follow-up to that, depending on the time frame, is if it takes 2 years, if you really are thoughtful and it takes 2 years, can some of these repairs wait that long? And if not, what's the amount of money that we would have to spend to keep our schools open while this 30-year plan is being created?
So this goes back to the no emergencies thing. I don't have a concern that somebody's going to close our schools. I don't have that. I know that's been a concern that's been voiced. I don't have that concern. What I am concerned about is, sticking with some stuff I've already mentioned. This room, if we don't put a sprinkler in here, it's going to limit the use of this building. There will be a poster, like the one back there on the wall, that says maximum occupancy. That occupancy will go down. Similarly, the auditorium, where the high school and the middle school drama programs have their home, if we don't address the outstanding issues, the use of that facility will be limited. And that's a life safety thing like anything else. As far as what we'd have to execute to just keep the status quo, we could quantify that. And this kind of goes back a little bit to Hawk's comment about, you can go through and line item this thing out and say this costs X and this costs Y. And if that's where we get to, okay, but we're going to miss some opportunity for adjacency and coordinated planning. As far as a time frame goes, I think that depends on how we approach this. And there's a little bit of a, if we look at this, I just keep mentioning the gym because we're sitting in it. If you look at this gym, I'm going to need some guidance. We're going to need some guidance about, is the priority community use of this space for maximum occupancy, right? Then that means one thing. Is the priority making this a target location for district sporting events, which means we got to replace this floor in a hurry and upgrade those locker rooms because they're not sufficient for that. The reality is, I think we should be looking at both those considerations at the same time because we'll do it better and cheaper and with a longer view if we do. So the time frame really is a function of how far ahead we want to look. If somebody says to me, if the consensus of this community is we're going to give you X dollars, just keep people safe, we'll do that. And in a couple years, we'll do it again. And we won't have addressed these larger issues around use and aspirational thinking.
Yeah, thank you. And I totally understand that. At the same time, I don't know if I'm questioning, I'm just curious, I guess, if we know what we're really getting for that $21 million price tag that we're paying. If we haven't done the studies to know how we want to use these buildings and how we want this to look in 30 years, how do we put that 21 million price tag on it without having done the studies prior?
So the 21 million price tag was settled on after the pendulum swung in both directions quite a bit. And that 21 million is a function, I don't want to speak for Jacob, but I think he would agree, we've talked about it a lot, is a function of taking these line items, which are estimates, are informed estimates, talking contractors and industry best practices and standards, and taking those line items and adding them up into a number that makes sense for each of those issues. That planning component is an investment that maximizes the value of each of those individual inspections, or in each of those individual investments. So the value, that 21 million value, is increased if it's the value of each dollar increases if you do it in one lump sum. If we take it out line by line by line, it's like anything else. If you buy in bulk, you get a better deal.
Thank you.
I do want to address what I consider my layman's brain around this. This is 5 years worth of work. So we would not, in theory, the reason why we would come with this big figure is to give us the amount of time to really make all of these decisions, be able to engage the community. I would guess the planning phase is going to be a year. You put out an RFP, you engage a consultant, and then we would want all of your input and be involved. So, Jonathan will continue to work forward on our immediate needs, but I would anticipate we would start by town meeting next year, we would say, this is what we've gotten from these outside groups, and this is the direction we really think we can take your funds. Does that help?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions for Jonathan or Sarah or the board? Come on up.
Okay, I'm Carol Lane from White River Junction once again, and I want to thank you for all your hard work and your answers. I have one question that I don't think anybody here can answer. People can think this is a great idea and vote yes on, next Monday?
Week from Monday, 15th.
But what happens when they don't pay? Because they can't. I'm worried about the taxpayers. And you don't have to answer the question. Just think about it.
Question maybe for Tom or the business manager. So the bond payments are part of the school budget and which are covered by income sensitivity. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The bond payments in Vermont are part of the school budget. So you won't see an extra bill or an extra charge on your tax bill for the bond specifically. The payment is put right into the budget. And that'll be the same for all the future years, all the past bonds, they're all part of the school budget.
But that doesn't answer, it wasn't a question. It was, I know that. But what happens when people don't pay their taxes because they can't?
No, I understand. I was just trying to clarify that the bond isn't a separate payment, like in New Hampshire often it is a separate article and there's a separate charge.
Other questions on this topic related to the bond issue? Okay, I see none, in which case we'll move on to the third and final section.
Before we finish here, thank you, John, for sharing some information, our great town manager. But as far as the rates go, the rate is basically kind of like a ceiling. So, if rates change or are more favorable, the bond bank will start to make those adjustments on those rates. So it's not necessarily that we're, locked in at the highest rate. The bond rates can fluctuate lower.
Great. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jonathan. Our last item of business here this morning is to review the town charter, school district and town charter changes. And I think, Mike, do you want to lead this? Yeah. Yeah, great. Awesome. Come on up.
Thanks, Chuck. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Hoyt from the Select Board. So on Election Day, you'll see some charter items, right? And so in Hartford, any changes to the charter need to be approved both on the town side and on the school side. Usually you vote on these items on the same day, on voting day, but this year, because the school budget has been delayed till the 15th of April, you're going to see these questions again. And so on voting day, there were two questions relating to changing the charter. One was whether to impose a 1% local option sales tax, and the other was whether to make various little changes within the charter, which I'll review. As Chuck mentioned earlier, in order for any charter change to be made, both the town and the school side have to approve the changes. So on voting day, the local option sales tax was defeated. It was defeated narrowly, but it was defeated. So no matter what, on the 15th, you'll still see that ballot item on the school side. Even if it passes then, it doesn't matter. It has to pass both, right? So the 1% local option sales tax is essentially off the table. What did pass on the town side were some various little changes to the charter itself, and I'll go through these. There's not a lot, so Tom, you may just need to scroll until we see some underlined language, which is additions to the charter. All right, so one of the first things is we put in language about warrant information night. So information night, it's just a meeting for the purpose of providing a presentation and discussions of items that may be placed on the warrants for voting day. So this year we did that, and we went over the changes to the charter that were proposed, a couple uses of our local option tax, a bond for the fire department. So those are the kind of things that we do. We usually have these when there are questions of interest on the ballot. So this is just putting us in the charter to sort of put it in there statutorily. So I think you can go on. So the next change was budget and candidates night. It generally says it's 7 p.m. We just got rid of that so that we'd have some flexibility to schedule it. The next one. Okay, so the other thing was we asked that the warnings for the town and school district meetings be posted on social media as well. We publish them on our website. They're printed in newspapers. In this day and age, putting them up on social media is another way to reach the voters of the town. So that's in there.
Let me see. So we changed the moderator's term on both the town and school side to a 3-year term. It was a 1-year term, so Chuck was having to run every year. 3-year term aligns with other elected positions in town, so it just made some sense. And that's both on the town and school side. And the next change, sorry, I can barely see. Oh, this is one where we changed sort of the voting requirements on the board. If we only had like 5 people there, and say you get 2 people abstaining and there's like a 2-to-1 vote in favor of something, we'd want to get at least 3 affirmative votes before something took effect. Just because I think the idea of having 2 yay votes just isn't enough. I mean, it's half a quorum, you know, but you could get in that situation where it happens. So we put that in there. And then I think there's just a couple other little ones. Yeah, these are super exciting, huh? Okay, so the collector of delinquent taxes, those duties shall be assumed by the town manager or their designee. This is what was happening in practice, but it's good, I think, to have it written out in case any question comes up. And then the assistant town treasurer. So the town treasurer, we give them the authority to appoint an assistant who can basically do what the town treasurer does when the town treasurer is out of town, like if they take a vacation or maybe if they're sick or incapacitated. So basically, we're able to identify someone who can perform those duties in the absence of the town treasurer, and it gets rid of any confusion there might be, you know, oh, the town treasurer's not here, who does this, right? And we're gonna let the town manager, or we'll let the town treasurer appoint an assistant. And I think that's actually all of it, so nothing too earth-shaking, really. You know, just a couple little changes that we think might be helpful. The main item, as I mentioned, was the 1% local sales tax. That's been voted down on the town side, so it doesn't really matter what happens with it on the school side. It's not something that's going to happen this year, at least. So those are the changes. Those changes I just went through, the miscellaneous ones, those did pass on the town side. So if they pass on the school side, then we would have approved those changes to the charter. The next step would be for one of our representatives in Montpelier to introduce a charter change bill, which would go through the legislature, and ultimately, we hope, be approved with these changes. But once you take the sales tax out of it, it's, you know, it's pretty vanilla, I guess you would say. So.
Okay, vanilla still the favorite flavor after all these years. Yes, Coach, comment?
Just a quick comment. With the charter, once the 15th occurs and we vote the school side of the charter, then we have the ability to bring it to Montpelier for legislative action. So even though anything else might occur that may or not, the charter will move forward after that vote, just for clarification.
Thanks, Coach.
Any questions for Mike on the proposed charter changes? As he said, this is identical to what we voted on town meeting day, so it's the same question again. Okay, I don't see a stampede of people coming to the microphone, in which case I believe that concludes our business for today. And once again, we'll be voting on these questions a week from Monday, which is the 15th of April. So we'll see everybody at the polls. Thanks so much for coming out.